Do you know how it feels when you've only played one game in a popular franchise, and it's the one people always complain about? Far Cry 2 was my introduction to the Far Cry series, and it's still the only game in that series I have played. I didn't just discover it recently either, I've been aware of it since launch, but I first played this game sometime between Far Cry 3 and 4's launch. Much like a lot of series people won't shut up about, Far Cry didn't become the mainstream success it was until the third numbered entry. The modern Far Cry games seem to be a bit stagnant and been there done that. I haven't played them, so I don't want to be an authority on that, but whenever a new Far Cry comes out, people seem to really like it but also say it's very similar to the previous game, and this keeps happening again and again. These games are still Ubisoft, and I know that pattern all too well, as someone who used to actually care about the Assassin's Creed series. This is their MO. They find a success, and they repeat it until it is less profitable than investors want, and then they change it enough so then they can get more success and they repeat that too. Far Cry 2 avoids this, all because while it has the scope and fun shooting you could expect from a company as large as Ubisoft, it sometimes feels like an auteur game from someone who hates being successful and popular. There is a reason Far Cry 2 isn't the blueprint for newer games, and 3 is the recycled template instead. Set in an unnamed African country, we take on the role of a mercenary who is here to kill an arms dealer supporting both sides during a civil war. We pick our playable character, which largely amounts to deciding which arms you want to look at, and we make our way to the country moments before things fall apart even further. We immediately get infected with malaria and are left to die. While there are story beats later, it largely takes a backseat to the daily goings-on of our protagonist, who is doing a lot of repetitive missions for both sides until we get to the guy we're trying to kill. This is a game about gameplay and mechanics, but the story shouldn't be outright dismissed, even if a lot of people think it's bad writing or a plot hole, that we're helping both sides interchangeably. This isn't an RPG about choices. We're a mercenary getting paid first and foremost, and both sides are aware of that, and we are a fortunate scapegoat for them on multiple occasions. As I said, this is gameplay focused, so what makes it enjoyable? Well, there is a lot to dissect here. The FPS controls work really well. Running and shooting flow wonderfully together, which is good because if it didn't there would be a big issue here. This is the bulk of the game, but there are little extra details that make it all shine. There are small immersive layers here, like the fact that right-clicking does stabilize my aim and slow my movement, but I don't magically zoom in unless I'm using a scoped weapon. And if you combine that with the default lack of crosshairs, you'll have to work at some good shots with certain weapons. And those weapons, we have a large variety of fun and devastating ones, but nothing too overpowered. Far Cry 2 is the master of making you feel simultaneously powerful and weak. Sure, I can strafe around and do all these cool slides with my shotgun or my flamethrower that uses surprisingly amazing fire and wind effects to engulf an entire village, but the enemies are also relentless and will always outnumber you. It doesn't take much to leave you on low health, and if you don't tend to a fatal wound quickly enough, you'll die right there. And whenever we're trying to heal these fatal wounds, it is very slow and deliberate. And we have to complete this all without it being interrupted, taking any shots during these long animations and you'll fall right there. Being on low health can turn even the most one-sided firefight into one where you're sprinting to cover and hoping you can just get a few seconds alone. The implementation of this health system is genius. We have 5 bars of health, and we auto-regenerate to the maximum of whichever bar we're on, assuming it's not the last one. Taking a stray bullet won't leave you impacted for too long, and as long as you can space out for shots you'll be fine. If you're down a section of health, they can be regained from water bottles you'll find in enemy encampments but are not carryable or something you can rely on. Or you can restore health with an ejection, which sets us at the maximum health regardless of how little HP we have. It's actually a pretty generous system, and you can carry multiple syringes at once, and this maximum can be upgraded later. And the problem is, while not as slow as healing fatal wounds, this still isn't instant and the animation will leave you exposed. And these health restorative syringes can only be refilled at safe houses or enemy bases. And if you don't conserve these enough, you'll need to go deep into their strongholds to refill. It can turn an active shootout into one where you're running from enemy to enemy, checking every structure for a medkit before returning to the fight. Or you can just brutally force this as you have unlimited attempts at healing yourself while you're in that final bleeding out section. You'll learn the right balance of when to use these and when not to, and if you explore the outposts you'll rarely be in need of medicine, but it is also something that can take its toll on you. It's always good to not use your entire inventory of syringes, because you're not the only one in need. Far Cry 2's buddy system is twofold, and it too can be surprisingly generous, but it expectedly can be depressing. Whenever you fall in battle, your buddy will come and save you. They are either one of the playable characters you didn't select, or one of the few women present in this game, because Ubisoft forgets women can be plot important or even playable. They are here to save you. You're the NPC now, you're the baggage to them. They'll pick you up, clear some enemies, and take you to a marginally safer area nearby, and then hand you a gun, which is a nice gesture, but it can replace better weapons. Then again, maybe they took my grenade launcher as a payment for saving my life. This system not only builds a genuine sense of camaraderie with these people, but it does ease tension a lot. This game can't be save scum on consoles, and while you can save scum on PC, you're missing a lot of the point if you do. Plus I hear PC elitists like to act like they're cooler than console players, so don't let them win. You need to give yourself a hard mode as well. This game is a harrowing experience, but these buddies are your one comfort. Unfortunately, they're fragile too, and they can die. If they find themselves fatally wounded, you can either use your own medicine on them, or if you have none, you'll have to leave them to die, and this is a permanent death. There are other buddies who can replace them, but they're finite too, and sometimes buddy deaths are unavoidable, so it's best not to go through your entire stock too quickly. Never use your last health refill unless you're fine knowing that these pals can die by your own hands. These lifesavers aren't just a treat, they are a responsibility. And so are your weapons. These things rust and will jam after enough usage, and eventually it can just lead to them exploding in your face, leaving you with one less weapon. This can be circumvented by buying new weapons and switching them up whenever you go to your weapon storage, and nothing is stopping you from just going in and replacing with an identical weapon off the shelf. All bought weapons start off with maximum durability, and these can be upgraded to last much longer. This is to discourage you from picking up weapons from corpses, and if you want the cooler weapons you'll have to do a few more side quests. If you regularly go back to the weapon storage, the durability mechanic will never really be an issue, except in the cases of a few isolated weapons like the dart gun, which is a really cool silent sniper rifle. It's a weapon that feels pretty overpowered even with its limited ammo, so it needs some kind of weakness, so you can't just rely on it all the time, and this is a great way to achieve that balance. The whole durability mechanic ultimately just ends up being a balancing mechanic for weapons like that, and to prevent you from just avoiding the weapon shop. But if you play the games by its rules, you won't even notice this. And if you don't want to play the game by its rules, this won't be the game for you. This is exemplified with the game's malaria mechanic. You being infected isn't just a narrative hook, because during the game at seemingly random intervals, you'll come down with malaria attacks, which just means your screen gets a filter and you can't really run. This is your prompt to take your malaria medication, which is entirely different than your health restoring medication. Keep avoiding your medication, and things won't go well for you. This is another responsibility to add to your list of responsibilities here. You can easily refill the quantity of medication, but this threat is always looming over you. But once again, this seemingly brutal mechanic is pretty generously implemented, and it isn't a complete pace breaker. You won't instantly die if you don't take these meds and you'll have plenty of time to get more. At first, this reminded me of Dead Rising 2, which also required you to use meds at regular intervals, but that was infinitely more punishing and a much more strict system. The wacky zombie game is more hardcore and restrictive than the gritty survival game. This isn't something you need to worry about too much, it's just something you need to keep in the back of your mind sometimes. Far Cry 2 gives you the illusion of a world that wants you dead at every interval, but it isn't needlessly cruel about it. For every system that hates you, another is added to protect you. But once you get the hang of the game and understand how it should be played, it rewards you on levels that few games can achieve. Despite all the caveats, this is still a fast-paced shooter with constant action. Every weapon is a blast and I'm constantly switching my approach. Should I snipe and come in after I'm spotted with my shotgun ripping through torsos? Or should I use an automatic weapon and run around everyone? Or should I be using explosive rounds and just aiming in the general direction? Or should I make my entire approach be stealth and keep trying to hide after I've been spotted and use silent weapons to take them out from behind? The stealth in this game is surprisingly great, but it's not super accessible. It requires an understanding of the game's mechanics, but it became my go-to approach in a lot of areas whenever I got the opportunity. Sneaking around at night behind foliage, taking silent shots right at the head, or quickly enough in succession they don't have time to scream or shout, and knowing when to change my location so they don't wise on too quickly, but still being inevitably spotted eventually. This was all a thrill ride. While you can get through an entire encampment without alerting a single person, it's a rare occurrence and not something you can rely on. But you are thinning the herd significantly, which makes the inevitable firefight much easier. This game wants you to work for the stealth if you're going for it. It's not just an easy win button. Just make sure you're killing everyone you intend to. These people can survive shots that could send them to the ground, and then still pull out their sidearm to shoot you from below knee height. Or if they're left alone for too long, they could regain composure and be back to walking in no time. But a good stab with your machete can leave them unable to get that last shot in. Killing people in this game is genuinely fun, but it should be avoided when possible. This open world is full of scouts driving the dirt roads looking for more people to kill, and while you can kill them all, you're giving up your ammo, dirtying up your gun, and possibly using health pickups. At best, you're coming out of these situations no better than where you started, and you could easily just avoid the whole thing. Avoiding these can lead to tense moments where you hide by the road and hope they don't see you, or you're trying to outrun them or drive from them, which is harder than it sounds. If you're driving, which is a large portion of the game because there really isn't fast travel, your car will stop working for you just after a few shots. But you can try to fix it, or if you're too busy avoiding shots, just run for it. But hey, at least you're a smaller target on foot and you're a lot harder to hear. Plus it is generally safer off-road, but this is a very hilly terrain, so roads are sometimes an unavoidable necessity. Most intersections have guard checkpoints, so it's good to know when to avoid the road and when to rely on it. This is a game with a lot of give and take, and it gives you all these fun mechanics and it taints each and every one with some kind of annoyance or obstacle. I love it. If I wanted pure, unadulterated, fast-paced action with little challenge, I have a large number of games to choose from, but Far Cry 2 with its deliberately limited scope speaks to me. This feels like a traditional modern open-world shooter, with like a dozen hardcore survival mods added to it. It's great that these mechanics all work so well because this is the whole game. Missions are very repetitive, with the only unique aspects being the additional optional challenges your buddies can request, but even those start to feel very samey. All you do is drive around and either kill a specific person or find a specific object that's usually in a place that requires you kill people anyway. Rinse and repeat. And since you're doing the same stuff with the same factions repeatedly, it all blurs together with some exceptions. These exceptions are moments that do really stick out as they further the story, but they are few and far between, and while narratively important, they aren't a large part of the core gameplay experience. Yet, one of these moments does actually change the game, as we learn that the map that we're in is only half of an even larger map, and the second half of the game sees us navigating an entirely different locale. And speaking of the map, it's fantastic. Like sure, you play in a pretty samey area that can blur together at times, but what I'm talking about when I say the map is fantastic is the literal map. Far Cry 2 is one of those games from the mid to late 2000s that was trying to be too cool for a heads-up display, but also it was too scared to fully commit to it, which is good, this game knows the right balance. We still have a visible health bar and ammo display. We're not going all in with inconvenient novelties that only exist to look cool, but a lot of elements that don't need direct one-to-one communication with the player are done through in-universe explanations. The most important of these is the map. Our character pulls out a physical map when not holding a weapon, and it comes in two flavors, very zoomed in or fully zoomed out. We can get precise directions and a better understanding of our immediate surroundings, or go all out and see the wider picture and how far we are from anything else. Most games rely on a simple mini-map for on-the-fly movement, and restrict a zoomed-out map of our entire location to a pause screen, or some other map that at best only quickly obstructs our process. This one, however, is easily accessible at all times and doesn't slow our movement. This small immersive feature actually outdoes a lot of games that don't care for immersion and put player convenience first. It's one of my favorite maps in a game. Only important information is given. It does everything it should do without being an overly confusing Ubisoft map. Plus, we carry an electronic map in our hands at the same time, and it flashes to tell us when we are nearby a collectible. For the most part, this will just be the diamonds, which can be hidden very deviously. Diamonds are our currency, and you'll be getting a lot of them just for completing missions, but these ones you can find off the beaten track are small bonuses to make you feel better for exploring, and not anything too important, but it makes me feel important, and that's what matters. Even if we ignore the map in the game, street signs are color-coded to direct you so you can just follow the red signs like it's Mirror's Edge. The world feels truly alive, and so much goes into it to make it feel that way. Shame it can glitch out sometimes. The biggest offender was people's faces not animating properly, and I also had issues with my character's arm either not fully displaying or just looking a little off. I guess a very high resolution was pushing it a little too far sometimes, but that's the worst of the glitches I experienced. Nothing game-breaking here, it can just be slightly odd to look at the finer details. Another small quirk is that things you can interact with glow, which is great because this world is cluttered with decorations, but they still glow during the scripted non-playable moments, which can be a little distracting. But that's like the worst of it. Despite all that, this is a beautiful game. It's hard to believe this came out in 2008. It's even harder to believe this came out the same month as Fallout 3. And not only is the graphical fidelity count with high pixel counts and other fancy words I don't understand, but more importantly, the art direction is great. This was the peak of the era of gritty, colourless games. Everything was brown, which had advantages like setting the mood, but it was still a net negative since everything blurred together and it left forgettable landscapes that were just depressing to look at. Far Cry 2 has a muted colour scheme, but a varied colour scheme nonetheless, and it looks believably like the real world, instead of a hyper-neon fever dream or monotone grit fest. If it was any more colourful, it would kind of mess with the tone the game was going for, and they could have easily gritted it up, but that would have just been less appealing to look at. The weather and time of day really brings this to life, as the entire atmosphere of a world can change as the day progresses. And this doesn't just affect how beautiful the game looks, it also affects NPC behaviour and their viewing ranges. If you really don't want to play during the night or during a storm because you actually like visibility, the game's copious amounts of safe houses will let you skip to your desired time, and no one can harm you from this impenetrable hut, but they are still happy to camp outside all night and shoot you as soon as you exit. Far Cry 2 is the type of game I can play for what I think might be an hour, but I get sucked in for many more. It's an immersive game that manages to perfectly balance exciting and thrilling highs with some tense and slow moments. I sat at my desk and played this with my cool glowing red gamer keyboard, instead of lying in bed with a tiny handheld, which is my go-to way to experience comfy mode. But I did still in fact experience comfy mode. This is a mechanics-based game, and you need to enjoy the mechanics and the gameplay, because that's what you're here for. You're not here for an exciting story or a role-playing experience. You're here for what Far Cry 2 is. I was going to call Far Cry 2 a modern classic, but it's 13 years old, so it's a classic modern. This game doesn't feel like it's aged, and it fits in right along with other modern open world shooters, at least in terms of gameplay, but it has the kinds of qualities that make it feel like a classic. With its many immersive and player-frustrating mechanics, make it truly admirable even if it didn't set the world on fire. But that's okay, because I can set these people on fire, look at them go!